Welcome to my channel, The Binge Eating Therapist. I'm Sarah, former binge eater turned psychotherapist, and now yogi. I'm 3 days back from India where I did my 200 hours teacher training in Rishikesh. And many of you have sent me lovely messages of support and asked how it was, so I thought I would create a video to share some of my experiences through a body image perspective. I've done a lot of work on accepting my body and how it looks, but my struggle that I still have at times is how my body feels and what my body is capable of, or rather not capable of. I have a chronic health condition called hypopituitarism, which means my body doesn't produce the hormones that it's supposed to. So I take a number of hormone replacements to try and get that balance, but it's artificial. This means sometimes I just don't know when it's okay to push my body. The amount of times I take on a physical challenge and I try and do more and push my body, and then my body just seems to break. If you listen to the podcast, you will have heard me talk about this, I'm sure. So I get to India and my body just hurts. I was dealing with a back issue. I'd strained my piriformis in the last few months before I'd gone, and I had been able to do almost nothing. And so I was nervous about going. I was worried it was going to make it worse. And when I got there, the piriformis stuff, I think the yoga seemed to help it. There was also an Ayurvedic masseuse on site, and the massages were so cheap. And so I was getting them to open my hips up and relieve the pressure on my back, and that seemed to help. And actually now, on the other side of the training, my back's fine. It's kind of worked some kind of magic, and my back is better now than it was before. That said, a couple of days into the trip, we have our first day off. And we go for a walk up to these waterfalls, which unfortunately were closed because of the monsoons and there were landslides. And as we're doing this walk along this busy road, India is one of those places there is just noise and sound and cars honking constantly. The roads are really quite frightening. Lanes are optional. And on that walk, my body just wasn't feeling good. My feet were hurting, my hips were hurting, my back was hurting. I had a headache and I just felt awful. And I was feeling really stressed, and I got back, I left everybody out, and I got back to the ashram. And I was genuinely, I had my phone out and I was looking at flights to come home. I was like, I don't feel well. I don't know why I'm here. I can't push myself. It's not going to work. So I did hang on. I thought I'll give it 24 hours. And then that first full week that we had there, the yoga was tough. And we were doing a lot of it. But what I noticed was that my body was starting to feel stronger and more open, and I got really excited about this. For all our classes, we had to sit on the floor cross-legged, and for many Westerners, but I think me especially, sitting cross-legged on the floor is a really uncomfortable position to adopt for longer than about 5 minutes. And so I was just constantly physically uncomfortable. But in that first week, I could feel the difference in my body. And I was thinking by the end of this, I was going to be able to sit cross-legged for hours. My body was just going to be transformed by the experience. So I had a good week, that first full week. But then, and this is what always happens to me, I start to push my body. I get excited about the things that my body can do. And then my body just starts to push back. First of all, I caught the Indian eye flu. It's basically conjunctivitis, but it's a pretty nasty kind that leaves you feeling really unwell. And so myself and a couple of my classmates, we had it, and we had to wear our sunglasses and sit at the back of the class like pariahs. And there's quite a lot of superstition in India at times. People won't look you in the eyes because they're afraid that you can catch it just by looking at somebody. And that was just a pretty uncomfortable experience, and meant I had to sit out. I think I sat out a day and a half of yoga when I wasn't feeling well for that. When the eye flu had passed, went back to doing the yoga, but my body just was not happy. I was getting a lot of wrist pain. There's so much time spent supporting your weight on your wrists, and when you're doing the flow, you're kind of moving your weight over your wrists. And I started to get pain in my wrists. Everything started to feel tighter, and I felt like I didn't have any strength. My strength seemed to disappear, and I'm watching everybody else, and everyone else just seems to be becoming stronger and more flexible, and I had another kind of crash with that and not wanting to be there, and again looking at flights to come home. It wasn't even when I was looking that I thought I'm definitely going to leave, but there was something about reminding myself that I could get out if I needed to, that I needed that escape hatch in order to be able to just stay with the experience. And in order to try and cope in those moments, I just kept coming back to when I remembered, feeling grateful for the things my body can do. I had Eckhart Tolle's Power of Now with me, and I would open that and read a couple of pages at night, and I found that really calming, and really it was like a reset. And it was interesting because I'm watching everybody else and I'm thinking everyone else is having such an easier time with it. Everyone else's body is like this, and I'm over here and my body's like that. And I was sending a voice note to a friend, and I was saying that there was this move in yoga that I hadn't been able to do and everybody else could. And when I finished the voice note, Becca, who was my friend who'd come with me, she said to me, "You know, Sarah, not everybody could do that move. Most people couldn't do the move." And I was surprised because in my mind and my memory of that moment in the class was that everybody else could do this thing and I was the only person that couldn't. I think it so happened that the girl next to me could. And so there was this confirmation bias, if you like, where my mind just filled in the gaps. And this is what we can do, particularly when we're feeling vulnerable and when we're in that kind of comparative state where it feels like everybody else is this, but I'm this. The mind will fill in the gaps. And it was a surprise to me when Becca said that people couldn't, because in my mind, I remembered it as I'd looked around and I'd seen everybody doing it. And that just wasn't even true. So we move into the third week, and I realized that my body just cannot sustain the level and the amount of yoga that the whole course requires. So I then ended up, and this was the hardest bit for me because it was fine if I was in a lot of pain or if I was ill, then I could give myself a reason on a yoga class to sit at the front and just observe. But when I was trying to figure out what my body can and can't do, to preemptively get myself to stop so that I didn't reach the point of pain, that was the challenge and that was the learning curve. Because I felt like I was being lazy. I felt like I was just not pushing myself enough. Because I was like, come on, you can do it. But I started to learn the edges of my body. And when certain ways I would push myself and it would hurt and it wasn't working for me. And then when I was in pain, I had to try and hold myself back. So I just wanted to tell people all the time. I wanted to explain to people, like I'm sitting at the front of the class because I'm in pain. I wanted to talk about it constantly because I didn't want people to think I was lazy. And so I'm holding this in as much as I can. Because for me, it was this desire to not be misunderstood. And only a handful of people had the opportunity to actually teach a class while we were out there. So I made sure that I volunteered to teach a class because I wanted the tutor to know that I was still engaged and I wanted to be here and I wasn't just checking out when I wasn't doing all the yoga. It's also worth noting, like it might sound like I was the only person sitting out and not doing the yoga, but pretty much every class there would be a handful of people who were not doing the yoga in that class and who would sit out. And my mind wants to respin it as I was the only one not doing all the yoga. And that's not true either. I think one of the hardest things was watching how much other people were enjoying pushing their body. And I just wasn't because it hurt. And that for me, I think, was one of the most challenging parts of it. And from a food perspective, I found myself feeling unsatisfied a lot. I talk a lot on my channel about satisfaction because for me it was one of the keys out of binge eating. And so to be having these meals where you feel kind of full but you just don't feel satisfied, that in itself it was okay while I was there. I didn't feel overly stressed about it, but I was really conscious that my mind kept jumping to, but what happens when you get back to the UK? If you've had a month of feeling unsatisfied with food, because that kind of would be what would happen with dieting or attempts to restrict, is just not feeling satisfied and then coming back and feeling that need to just have all the foods. And so I was a little bit concerned that I might come back and just want to eat everything in sight, which wouldn't have been necessarily disordered eating. That's quite a natural response. But if you're somebody who's struggled with binge eating in the past, to come back and feel like you want to eat everything can just be a really difficult experience to try to navigate. So I talked it through with Becca at the time, just to kind of get it clear in my mind. Like, I had this sort of fantasy about what it might be like when I'm back. I had to think about, how do I need to look after myself? And I came back to my intention. The one that I have around food a lot is just, I can have what I want. I just need to really enjoy it. So I set myself this very clear intention that when I got back, because for me, the danger point is if I go unconscious with food. So it's okay to come back and eat more of the foods than I normally would, the foods that I have missed. But the danger would be is if I flipped that switch and went unconscious with it. And actually, since I've been back in the last 3 days, it's actually been really easy. I've kind of been surprised. But I would rather be surprised that way and have anticipated that this could have been harder than it was, that transition back. So I guess I'm sharing this because even if you get to a place where you are settled and you consider yourself recovered from disordered eating, I'm always so conscious about being complacent, because so many times in the past I thought I'd recovered. I thought I had fixed myself from binge eating. And the minute I thought I had, that's when I would fall and I would end up binging again. So I think I think it was wise of me, I'm so wise, to anticipate that could have been tricky. And actually it wasn't nearly as tricky as I thought it could have been. And now that I have this yoga teaching qualification, my plan is to put on some day workshops which combine yoga and group therapy. So it would be a case of exploring these edges of our body with yoga, with some of the yoga moves, and then coming together in a group therapy setting and processing what's going on. Because so many people I work with are disconnected from their bodies. And there are certain, especially things like heart-opening poses, that can feel incredibly vulnerable in your body. So when you're being invited to really inhabit your body, that's likely to stir up some difficult things. So to then have the group therapy combined with it, anyway, I think this is a good idea. Let me know what you think. I'm going to put a link below, which you can check on to see when these are going to be coming along and where they're going to be coming along. And maybe I get to connect at one of them in the future. But if you want to connect with me in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be in Dublin on Saturday, the 16th of September. So I'm going to put links for Dublin. If you want to come to Dublin and hang out with me and Steph and Sinead and Shauna, then click on those links to find out more. It would be great to meet you in person. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next video. Namaste.